the system itself. We have actually committed ourselves instead then to our ruin. The only thing that preserves immutable tokenizations of our wealth is mathematically perfected economy. So if we allowed ourselves, which this transformation to mathematically perfected economy does, but if we just allow ourselves to retain these securities, so-called, under a transformation to mathematically perfected economy, which would avert this terminal failure, we would be so much better off. It's incredible to think in regard to that on the contrary, people think, oh no, mathematically perfected economy, because it would destroy the need for investment. It would destroy the value of what we've invested in. On the contrary, mathematically perfected economy is the only thing which can preserve the just value of those investments. So people naturally in protecting in their very narrow tunnel-visioned idea of protecting their wealth, commit themselves to their own destruction, and in so doing they commit the rest of us to the destruction which ensues as well. But a further vital thing for us to understand is that the health of the purported markets is a huge part of the lie, which does not reflect the vitality of the lie of economy. People, because they don't understand that the causes of the first Great Depression were likewise this fundamental obfuscation of the currency. They think wrongly. They simply associate the onset of the first Great Depression with the collapse of the stock market. So they are unwittingly their own victims of their own ignorance, that they think as long and any way that the vitality of the stock market can somehow be preserved, however artificially, by accumulating far greater debt. What do we hear, for instance, of the Federal Reserve has rescued the decline in the in the values of stocks and securities. We've heard this since Reagan was president. Each time the market takes these steep downward turns, what does the Federal Reserve do? It goes out and buys federal securities. What does this mean? It means that it's monetizing our future production by a debt which we begin to pay on immediately if we service the debt at all, which multiplies the debt into further indebtedness. Nonetheless, for the negligible benefits, if any, of preserving, falsely preserving, and artificially preserving the purported value of the stock market, while this very terminal system itself is destroying those values because it's expatriating our industry, because it's extinguishing our industry, because it's extinguishing the abilities of the markets to consume production. If we don't fix the system, we suffer that failure, and all we're doing is transferring the costs of artificially sustaining these markets to an ever greater cost, equivalent not just to the debt that we assumed and not just to the interest on that debt, but to the multiplication of indebtedness, in which at the end of the lifespan of any initial debt, the further debt we've assumed is so much as all the periodic interest, or all the interest, in other words, on the debt through its lifespan. So at the end of any period, the debt at the end of the period equals the former principal plus all the interest over the period. So this is something that, for our own hope of sustaining ourselves, we're accumulating all this further federal indebtedness whenever the purported Federal Reserve System, 12 private corporations, go out and monetize our future production, not even of our own generations, of future generations, into bankruptcy. And we do this because we're so short-sighted that we think somehow we're going to survive a terminal system, which act of attempting to survive it as we are only persists in our in a perpetual state in which we exist at the brink of terminal failure. The only thing that relieves us of all the artificial extinguishing of our very opportunity to prosper in this perpetual terminal state that we've suspended ourselves in is to fix the system.
They just said they had considered all of the comments that we had made, and they were still of the belief that in order to calm the markets and move forward, it was necessary for Lehman to go into bankruptcy.
Calm the markets.
Yes.
Aye. And who, after all, would be interested in this concept of, quote, calming the markets, unquote, particularly at the expense of the failure of the very types of entities which at the same time, just prior to this or in other cases, they might be inclined to, quote, rescue, unquote, in order to persist in perpetuating this system of terminal failure. Calming the markets is a concept of deceivers, because if the markets, whatever they may be, reflected anything important on the rest of us, first of all, this idea that they represent our production would be exposed as a lie. It wouldn't be perpetrated by these very perpetrators. The reason is these things they call markets are not the market. They are an arena which, much as in the days of the Roman Colosseum, real industry is slayed. It's robbed of its profits by denying sufficient circulation to sustain further industrial endeavors, and subjecting the attempts of entrepreneurs to engage in new industry to this deprivation, which forces them to give in to purported investors who in fact are predators who contribute nothing to these endeavors which are vital to our prosperity, and yet take generally great shares of the profits, imposing further costs on industry. And so these arenas are hardly evidence, and their vitality is hardly evidence of the vitality of our industry or the prosperity of the people. On the contrary, it's generally evidence instead of the denial of prosperity to free enterprise. It's evidence of the denial of just reward for production to true free enterprise. It's a denial of true free enterprise itself.
When were you first told that Lehman, in fact, was going to go bankrupt?
After the fact.
After the fact. Wow. Okay. And what was your reaction when you learned of it?
Holy cow.
Paulson and Bernanke had not consulted with other governments and didn't understand the consequences of foreign bankruptcy laws.
Lehman Brothers London continued to empty their
Under
desks.
British law, Lehman's London office had to be closed immediately.
All transactions came to a halt, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of transactions.
The hedge funds who had assets with Lehman in London discovered overnight, to their complete horror, that they couldn't get those assets back.
One of the points of the hub failed, and that had huge knock-on effects around the system.
The oldest money market fund in the nation wrote off roughly $750 million in bad debt issued by the now bankrupt Lehman Brothers.
Lehman's failure also caused a collapse in the commercial paper market, which many companies depend on to pay for operating expenses such as payroll.
That means maybe they have to lay off employees. They can't buy parts. It stops business in its tracks.
Suddenly, people stood and said, listen, what can we believe in? There's nothing we can trust anymore.
But that's the thing. It isn't that there's nothing that you can trust anymore. It's that the only thing that you can trust in terms of a purported economy is the principles which can serve you. When you give up your own right to issue promissory obligations free of extrinsic manipulation, adulteration, exploitation, or even denial in the end of the very opportunity to make good on them, what you've done is committed yourself to all these consequences. And so the thing is that we can always rely, and we can only rely, on real principles, on the truth, upon comprehensively and therefore exhaustively and accountably dissecting all these issues so that we can understand that indeed there is one and one only solution for all of their iniquities, injustices, improprieties, man-made, imposed faults, which exist merely to perpetrate exploitation.
That same week, AIG owed $13 billion to holders of credit default swaps, and it didn't have the money.
But of course, from the very inception of these inventions, which are mere devices hoping to outstrip a system of terminal exploitation, from their very inception, they were no good. From their very inception, what they worked against, or what they hoped to tread water against, was a tide which could only drown out all efforts, however excessive, deviant, criminal, or whatever in nature. The only reason that any of this is going on, nonetheless, is to either perpetrate unearned taking or to preserve tokens of wealth against a system of terminal dispossession, which diminishes the value of money, and particularly at terminal state. So the issue again is, not that